Hi, Marilyn.
Hi, Brian. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. So, is that your launch pad area
This
that you're
is
in?
this is my launch pad.
How many out-of-body experiences do you think you've had in that space?
Hundreds, prob
Hundreds? More?
um, and last night was quite the adventure as well.
Really? Can you tell
Uh,
me about it?
yeah. Last night I was taken into. I can't go into a great deal of detail because it was very abstract, but I was taken into being shown an overhead map of the apocalyptic times that we have now entered. And I was being shown the important parts that I was to play in different aspects of it. And this was very surprising to me because this has never been something that I, um, saw as being something as part of my calling. But it was shown to me that it was very much a part of my calling to be here during this time. And I was given um, several sets of books. And, in a lot of the mystical experiences I have, I'm given books. And sometimes these are books that you cannot, get on earth. Sometimes I'm shown books that I can actually go get and read. But these were all books that I can't get on earth. And a lot of times what happens in these experiences is you are being given somewhat of the energy of the knowledge that's contained within them. And as you continue um, opening up the meaning of the mystical vision, it will the contents of it become more and more clear to you. So the information that's in there is kind of like being downloaded into you as you are experiencing this. But then the complete information and the complete importance of it unravels. It unfolds, and things become known to you that that you didn't previously understand, and that's how it does that. And there was a priest there who was guiding me and showing me these different conjunctions over my whole life as to how it was leading to this time and this other total different conjunctions of this abstract period of time now known as the apocalyptic period. Ironically, I have to curl this over, but I'll just let this is the kind of stuff I do when I come back from mystical experience. I just scratch out little notes, but my notes were the signs of the apocalypse. A particular priest was there. I know who he was, so I just put it down. I saw and was given many things, and I had to know what it would look like because I was a pivotal, a pivotable. I
Mm.
was a pivotal um, part of some aspects of what was coming in, and then these books were given to me. And these were like sets of books. So like 5 or 6 volumes was one of the sets of books. It was blue, and then there were these other books that were more individual volumes. But I remember this one in particular was a set of books, and I was only given 5 or 6 volumes, but there were actually about 40 volumes in the entire set. But they were giving the other volumes to other souls who were present, who were also playing pivotal roles in what we were being told was this apocalyptic time that we are now entering. And it was really, really a powerful experience. And because there's a certain sense of disbelief, that it's like, wow, this is really kind of happening now, isn't it? And, because, we all, so many of us have had so many types of visions about apocalyptic events, and I mean not just in our generation, but in thousands, the last couple thousand years. So it's something that we've all, as mystics, we've all seen these things. I mean, you can read about the visions of Emanuel Swedenborg in the 16th century, and all the way back to the beginning, St. Paul in the beginning. And so we never know exactly what that means.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, as far as Let's see. How should we go into this? What did the apocalypse look like?
It wasn't it was what I was being shown was it was signs of the apocalypse, and, ironically, it was not the things that a lot of other people are being shown. I know of some other people who are having the mystical visions that include what you would consider like apocalyptic visions. And I've mentioned before Father Michel, um, who is, the apostle of I think the apostle of the end times. Is that what he called? What
Yeah,
it's called? And he has, the actual, the ones that are more the fire, you know the the fiery atmospheres and those types of vistas. What I was seeing was events leading to events and series of actions leading to different connections that needed to happen spiritually for the next um, phase to occur. And what is that phase? That was not given to me to know, but it was very clear that it was really, really important in a bigger sense of things, in terms of all humankind, all spiritual, evolution, all of us as the human race, but all life. And it was very, very important. But it was just literally the beginning of allowing me to see into what this might look like, and in order to how to travel through it, in order to bring about the alterations or the things that my soul is particularly called to do during that period of time. And like I said, there was a lot of abstraction. In the mystical experience, you can have a great deal of your experience can be very abstract, non-linear, and so in fact, with some of my spiritual counseling clients, we've developed a way of, communicating about that, which is, okay, so I had something really important last night, but it was abstract and nonlinear. you know,
mhm,
okay, so it was one of those things where it's this really powerful energetic thrust that comes in. You're allowed to remember that you had it, but you're only given to remember very minimal in terms of details. And part of that is because it comes in pieces, and eventually then you have other types where you have where those pieces come together, and you can have like the other types of visions which we talk about, which are much more of a clear direct message, a much more clear direct, you know exactly what you're being shown. This is one of those abstract non-linear moments where it's like, wow. It's kind of like when, it reminds me of a time like 10 years ago when I had this amazing, beautiful out of body experience where I was shown the history of salvation. And again, it was very abstract and nonlinear, but I was taken through, the entire history of the world and was watching salvation history unfold. And what happens is these elements and these energetic components of it become known to you in a way that is, and this is, when we talk about the vibrational knowledge,
mhm.
this is when that's happening, where you're literally learning vibrationally what will then slowly emerge into something that you can uh, maybe codify at some point in words. But there are a lot of experiences that you can have in the out of body travel state that will remain abstract and nonlinear, which are where there's these multiple realities, these multiple spheres that are merging together, that are working on our unconscious, our subconscious minds, teaching us things and bringing things together so that we will then reach another birth point where that knowledge will become more clear to us. But that's actually a very, very common process throughout the out of body travel experience, that you will have these periods, or not even necessarily always periods, sometimes periods of time, sometimes just a few experiences in between things where, and people can get very frustrated by them because it's like, wow, that was so important. And I know it was so important. Why can't I remember the details? You know, that's the abstract, nonlinear stuff. And that's, ironically, it's always a good sign because it means something is being formed within you, something that you are being taught that will, that will come to fruition. But, it comes in its own time.
And so perhaps it's not always necessary for one to consciously know what has happened during the night. It's just an
Exactly.
energetic download. It's an experience. It's there. It's part
Yes.
of the subconscious, the soul, the unconscious.
Well, and even with yes, because there are a lot of people too who think that when they have a night where they don't have any memory, nothing happens. They don't have, this is, once someone is having, regular conscious out of body experiences, or uh, some type of lucid dreaming or mystical experience, they think that if nothing happens, that's a bad sign. And that's not actually. That's part of the ebb and flow of how the energy moves, where, you know we go unconscious in order that we might be prepared for the next step, which is the next conscious event. And so it's a necessary part of allowing ourselves to receive those energies and vibrations that actually bring us knowledge through vibration. Because we talk about how knowledge is not information, it's vibration. And that's what this what I'm doing here is, this is what you're seeing in your experiences, is this is how that vibration, aka then knowledge, is going to move.
Mhm.
So there's going to be an ebb and flow. It's going to pull back and then thrust back up, pull back, thrust back up. And then this is how, then you look at it kind of like a staircase, where you're going higher and higher and higher, close to God. But there's always going to be a little bit of pulling back, going further up, going further down, going further up. But you're still, you know as long as that movement is actually on an upward slant, you're doing okay. And in the beginning, you are going to be more like doing this, and at different periods, you're going to be going through periods where you're going to be on one plane of movement with that energy, in order to go through that period of understanding and attaining to that knowledge. And then you'll be okay, I'm done here, and I'm going to be taken again to the next step, whatever that might be.
And let's get into that a little bit deeper as we go forward. But I wanted to ask you about out of body experiences in regards to religions. And of
Sure.
course, you wrote the Voice of the Prophets about all the major religions
Yep.
and including indigenous people. And so, we're also talking about the apocalyptic times, visions.
Yep.
Some people who are very religious, they may not feel that out of body experiences, the apocalypse, or visions are a part of their religion. But can you speak to that a little bit, since you've gone through and really dove into the major religions?
Well, ironically, yeah, you mentioned the Voice of the Prophets, Wisdom of the Ages, which is an encyclopedia of ancient sacred text in 12 volumes. And it's literally an encyclopedia of ancient sacred texts. It's a really good resource for that sort of thing. I also wrote another book that is really good for this. It's called Near Death and Out of Body Experiences, Auspicious Births and Deaths of the Prophets, Saints, Mystics, and Sages in World Religions. I think that one of the things that is sometimes overlooked is that most religions were born, um, from a profound out of body event, an out of body travel event. Um, because that's what revelation usually is. St. Paul speaks of whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know. Zarathustra, the founder of Zoroastrianism, was a profound mystic. Um, Judaism is a religion of great revelation. You know, these are, the prophets of Judaism speak for themselves. Ezekiel,
We
the prophet, Moses.
we
Go
have
ahead.
Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, Judaism. You have a couple of volumes of that one. Mystery religions, a couple of those. Zoroastrianism, which you just mentioned, Buddhism, Confucianism, Christianity, African religions, Aboriginal religions, Native American religion,
Mm-hmm.
Baha'i, Islam, and abridged lesser known texts. Those are just the 12 volumes broken down
Yes.
of Wisdom of the Ages, Voice of the Prophets.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you for doing that. Ironically, one of the books in that series that is one of my favorites is the volume on the abridged lesser known texts, because I always like the lesser known ancient sacred texts out there, because those are always the ones that have little surprising little gems in them, so there's a lot of interesting things in there, but yes, Hinduism was born out of this sort of thing as well. We have Krishna, we have Rama, we have there's all kinds of things there. Jainism, Sikhism, the Sri Guru Granth Sahib was brought in with Guru Nanak, originally, and he was having these profound ecstatic visions, and of course deep contemplative meditation. And there's some of these things overlap one another, like Sikhism, which where they go into the golden stream of sound and all these things, and this is all very mystical stuff. This is what all the mystics from throughout the world and the ages and all traditions are talking about. They might call it something else. I really like what the Sikhs call it, and that's also something the Sant Mat people call it, which is the golden stream of sound, which is this is what happens if you're entering into an out-of-body experience. You're entering into this stream of energy which flows within the universal vibration of God. It's a wonderful, beautiful thing. And people can also touch into that in deep meditation. And so you see that there are people who are having these experiences both ways and touching into that thing. Hinduism talks about the universal vibration, which is the sound of the and that is something that you will hear. Ironically, that is the sound of vibration in the universe.
And
If you
that's on
listen.
your logo.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's the reason I picked it. And, and so we see this across the board. In Jewish religion, you had Ezekiel and Enoch, one of the greatest out-of-body travelers of all time. Oh my gosh, we have the book of Enoch, but you also have the secret books of Enoch, and there are other books of the travels of Enoch through the heavens, the hells, and the purgatories. Very profound. Most of them are included in the pseudepigrapha, which is basically an apocryphal text of the Jewish religion. And so these are easily attainable books. They're not like so remote that they're just really unknown or something. They are just they're there. And what happens, I think, is that people do not look at it closely enough to realize that there is a common experience that they are all speaking of. Then when you go back and you look at the saints throughout history as well, the saints of all the different religions, and in the near-death and out-of-body experience of the prophets, saints, and mystics and sages in world religions, I include a lot of their saints of the different traditions, because that's what happens, is they all touch into the same source. And so you start seeing that the divisions that are apparent on the ground, in religion, when you actually look at the mystics in the religion, like if you take some of the writings of Catholic mystics and compare them to the writings of Sufi mystics. They're not going to, because they're converging here. Okay, so you have to look here. They're converging up here at a high point in the spirit. And that's why when they meet in the spirit, in the mystical, they're not so far apart. And in fact, you'll see that there is a great deal of similarity between what they experience. Rumi is an excellent example of this because he was an Islamic Sufi. People forget that Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi, who is, the most famous poet in the world, he is the most popular poet and the most famous poet in the world, was also, one of the greatest mystics the world has ever seen, and is also an Islamic Sufi, from Afghanistan, by the way. And so, so we forget that there is this internal treadmill that we're all kind of meeting on when the mystics are meeting together and converging in the spiritual realms, versus when we get caught up in the different dogmas. You can see those differences. When the mystics are seeking God, the unity, the unification becomes much more clear. And there's a reason for that. It's because you are throwing back the physical constraints of understanding and moving forward into the eternal understanding of unity. And there's a reason that we all must understand as well, which is, God created all the humans, and God created all the regions of the world. So God, intended for there to be, he also created all the prophets and all the different mystics. And, so there's a reason for these different paths, these different world religions. I talk about that a bit in the Mysteries of the Redemption, which is that, each of these world religions has different types of focuses and constructs that are very specific. And if you bring together these different things, you actually have a much more visible perfection than when you keep them all apart. You have a more visible perfection because you are not excluding God's creativity in any human person.
Great. The Mysteries of the Redemption you brought up. This is your first book?
That would be my sort of first book. Yeah, my first two books were published in 1991 and 92, and that was Odysseys of Light and Crystal River Flowing by Hampton Roads Publishing. And then The Mysteries of the Redemption was published in 2003, but it contains a rewritten version of both of those books, along with what was intended to be a 16-book series, is all
So,
now included in The Mysteries of the Redemption.
okay, and then the Mysteries of the Redemption is broken up into 5 books.
Right.
The first book is Prelude to a Dream.
Right.
And in that, you talk about realms and dimensions. And there is the 3rd and 4th purgatorial realms that we live in. And there's the lower realms, realm number 2 or dimension number 2. Maybe I guess realm is better. And realm number 1, which is the darkest, heaviest.
Yeah.
And then there's 5 and above, which are the higher realms. And then there's infinitesimal amounts of realms within each realm.
Right.
Right. Like unlimited amounts of hell realms or heaven realms. So can we speak of that a little bit? And also I'm wondering, let's just go with that for now, and we'll go into the next step after that.
Okay. Well, yes, you do have an infinite number of heavenly, purgatorial, and hellish realms. And part of that comes from, I think, part of the reason people get confused by this is they think that there's one location, what we find when we start experiencing out of body travel is that um, you know, there's so much more out there than we can possibly fathom. But when you're dealing with like purgatorial and hellish realms, there's going to be as many of those created as we can create in terms of what we need to purify ourselves from. So, you know, there are places that, you know, many souls will go where there might be similar issues that need to be worked through, but there are also places that, you know, we might individually create. And then other souls might come there too, because they might have something similar. It's very complex in how it works energetically, because, you know, everything is compatibility. That's what my hands are kind of like, we flow, you know. And what happens, you know, in the afterlife, people kind of view the afterlife oftentimes as a very linear, very one-pointed thing, when in reality what I have experienced in terms of helping souls who are crossing over, it's a many faceted thing. So souls can begin their journey in one location, and they may go through 20 or 30 different places that where they will be taught things, where they will be educated. These may be purgatorial realms, um, and they may be other types of realms where they are working themselves through the issues or the confusions or the things that they did not properly understand, or the things that they need to, uh, you know, correct to move closer and closer to an all holy God.
And so
You know,
let's go from there for a second. And so if we talk about everything that you said, sounds like this is an educational process. It's a school. It's an earth school. So, and if we talk about the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the
mm-hmm.
Egyptian Book of the Dead, really what our goal is here is to graduate from this earth school so that we can continue on along the path. And if you think that's correct for the most part, then where do we go after we graduate from earth? And what is the potential for most souls right now? And how many souls do you think are not going to graduate and are going to keep the karmic recycling going, where they just have to keep relearning those lessons over and over? I know that's 4 or 5 questions wrapped into one, but
Yeah, so if I miss any, just remind me. But
okay.
but you know what happens that we uh, we don't realize that we are. Sorry, I'm trying to. I was going on one thread, and then it's kind of like my mind just went blank.
Sorry to segue you for a second, but we were in the realms,
The
and
realms. And
and we
okay,
were
so what is going forward as to, and then what happens to those who aren't going to be able to go forward? So, you know, ironically, like Paramahamsa Yogananda talked about this too, where he would talk about the astral planets, you know, where once a soul was moving on, they would move on to the astral planets. Of course, you know, the Catholic religion talks about going into the heavenly realms. Manuel Swedenborg talks about going into one of 3 levels of heaven that has to do with um, whether your love is exterior, interior, or, you know, different types of things. There's a lot of different ways that this manifests, but it really comes about with compatibility. So one of the reasons I stress the ancient sacred texts so much, and this is so important, is because I have seen it mystically so many times that the ancient sacred texts have been shown to me as a staircase from earth to heaven. And we have to look at these ancient sacred texts as being, which is what they are, the last words of those souls as they were leaving this earth for the last time, you know, because they were graduating from here and going off. And so these are the, you know, these are very important words that were left behind for us. And when we put together all of these ancient sacred texts, we're literally compiling like this body of knowledge of what what is the mystery here of what we have to achieve and attain. And as you know, throughout my journey, it's been a process of, taking in these different knowledges that these different texts contain, and I'm led to, which ones I need to study next and things like that. But what we're looking at is going to a higher, finer sphere, which is, like realms 5 and above is where everything is light and above. And so, once you're in the light realms, you're looking at a place where love and light prevail, and it's just a matter of going to higher, finer frequencies as you go higher. And it's, believe me, it's a very desirable place. And, continuing to rise towards the higher and higher places is very desirable once you're there. There's a level of blessedness that is just so tangible. There is a huge amount of souls that do kind of tend to do this over and over and over again. And, frankly, mine has been one of them. And, most of us have been, and this is probably part of the reason why many of us are called in a certain way when we are trying to hopefully reach the end of our journey in this earthly sphere, to um, to put down in writing those words, which will hopefully lead others to the liberation that they seek as well. Um, but there are so many different things that can happen depending on the soul. Um, I talk about this in all of my books because I travel through and I work with souls who are in different states after death. Um, so why don't
Lost
you,
souls, ghosts.
lost souls, ghosts, yeah.
Well, to me, there's seems there's dark souls on the planet. There's almost seems to me that people come here to Earth and they have certain proclivities that keep them at a lower vibration, but there's all these tempters and temptations and almost a structure here on Earth that keeps people kind of here and trying to take them down further. Now, what is the goal of these dark ones, these souls that are not from the light? What's the purpose of them trying to go down, down, down? I don't understand that. I'm so confused.
Okay, well, you mean the spirits that reside around the earth, or the people?
And human beings that have gone to the dark and
Okay,
seem to want to bring the earth and bring souls down. What is the purpose and who's driving that?
well, we are, because the reason we're here is because it's a mortal realm, which is where the battles between good and evil reside. So um, as individual souls, the battle between good and evil is occurring within us and around us. Um, and so this is always going to happen here in a mortal realm, and there are many mortal realms. This isn't the only one. So this is the nature of a mortal realm. Um, Remembering again, we go where we're compatible. We create our own compatibilities. So even in the sense of, people drawing towards them, even the spiritual support that supports their position. If a person is participating in something that's dark and they are not doing anything to weed that out of their soul, they're probably drawing in energies that support that way of life. And that sort of thing can actually, create that energetic thing that pulls people down. Whereas this is the difficult thing, because in order for us to actually access and go higher, we have to break free of our own bondage, which is usually of our own making. It's our own habitual things that we hold on to that are of a dark nature. Sometimes it's even just the laziness of not wanting to actually do the work to discern what it is that we're doing. You know what I mean? The discernment process, and then actually having to root it out, because it is a process. It's not something for the someone who just wants to have a lukewarm kind of spiritual life, and I think that's one of the reasons why it is so easily overlooked by so many, because very few people really want to seek God with all their soul, all their will, and all their love, and all their might. you know um so we need to like look at things like this that remind us, like even in the Taoist texts, there's that saying, um it's an old teaching of the Taoist masters, where the master is talking to the student, and the student says, well, when will I find enlightenment? And the master pushes his head under the water and holds his head under the water, and then he's like, ah! And then he comes up, he lets him come up, and he says, when you see God the way you just sought air, that's when you will find God. And that really is, the truth. And especially, in a world that's become so secular, and it's become so unpopular to even consider the work that's required of each of us individually, the literally the discipline, the ascetical theology, the mystical theology that we need to undergo, which is literally the evaluation of our own propensities, of our own works, of our own our own lives, and the direction that we're actually following. It's very difficult to make real progress forward without the prayer, without the meditation, without the spiritual reading. St. Padre Pio really emphasized that the daily spiritual reading was absolutely essential for people trying to make progress here in their spiritual life. So it becomes much more difficult when we don't understand that this is not it's not really going to be a hobby. If you really want to just climb that mountaintop, you're going to be doing, it's going to take up a good part of your energy and time, and you're going to want it to, because it becomes a fiery passion to overcome this. It becomes something that you must do. It's something that you cannot not do. If it's a casual observance on the side, it's much harder to bring about the
Redemption.
yeah, to bring it about. Yeah, I mean, you can bring about the redemption, um even with meager effort, because literally we just turn towards God. But then we also have to be willing to follow that up with the work that will come of that decision, because once we make the decision, there is work that follows.
And in the mysteries of the redemption, to me, it's a blueprint, a map of sorts to follow and seeking out that process. So I mentioned Prelude to a Dream. That's the first of the 5 books that the Mysteries of the Redemption is broken up into. Passage to the Ancient, Medicine
Yep.
Woman Within a Dream, Absolute Dissolution of Body and Mind, and the Mystical Jesus.
Yes.
I wanted to bring up one more thing with this train of thought that we're talking about
Sure.
in regards to the apocalypse, out-of-body travel, secular religious beliefs and such. But I wanted to bring up the word terrestrial. So I looked up terrestrial. So it can be dry earth. It can be what we call our Earth, a planet that's dry. So there's a lot of terrestrial planets that Mars, for instance, is terrestrial. At noon at the equator, it's warm enough where life grows. So there's life on Mars. So we know this, right? But as we know, there's millions and millions of solar systems throughout our galaxy. and we're very well aware that there's many, many planets, terrestrial planets, that have are close enough to a sun, a solar place where they can get enough heat, even though sometimes just the core of the Earth would be enough to heat up a planet for, you know, beings like us that are alive, that walk around. Because we can get into how there's spiritual beings that live on planets in our solar system, even though it's not terrestrial. I'm not one that talks about extraterrestrials. So extra just means, and to us, because there's terrestrial everywhere. So why is it extra if there's terrestrial planets everywhere, right? But we say extra because it's not us. So we're like, oh, you know, you mean extraterrestrial? No, just terrestrial. That's terrestrial. So in regards to terrestrials, now in regards to religion,
Mm-hmm.
how many faiths talk about, and I know the indigenous do, about um, terrestrials that we're not used to seeing that come to this planet, the terrestrials from different planets that come here? How many religions speak about this? Because for me, it's like, I've never wanted to be put into that place where people can go like, oh, you're one of those. You believe, you know, I never wanted to be, but I mean, just, you know, what we know, there's terrestrials, and then there's a lot of people who've had a lot of experiences. And how many religions talk about that? And then how many people who are religious are going to say like, well, I don't want to go there because, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, this will have to be my opinion on it, but my opinion based on researching a lot of archaeological evidence and ancient sacred texts, and, you know, researching the other theories. You know, there's going to be different views, you know, and the religions themselves may not agree with what I'm, you know, proposing, but, you know, so, you know, what you have is, you have, like you said, the Native Americans, especially the Hopi, have a pretty strong, you know, origin myths, but all of them do, that involve this. And then you also have, you know, in just the Old Testament, you have the book of Ezekiel, which is, you know, very much attributed to the possibility of, was that an extraterrestrial event, you know, by a lot of people. You have the same thing with many of the Hindu Vedas and, you know, the Srimad Bhagavatam. There's a lot of things in those books. There was there's some, I think it's called Vimanas, is some of the ways that some of the vehicles that they talked about traveling
Yes,
in,
sure.
you know. So you definitely see that in Hinduism. um, and then, you know, I haven't, you know, studied it to the greatest degree on every single religion, so I'm trying to think here off the top of my head. But, you know, that's gonna, you're looking at that, when you're just even looking at the book of Ezekiel, that, you know, that's a book that applies to uh, Christianity and to Judaism, and in some respects it applies to probably a little bit of Islam, but I'm not sure. We'll let them decide whether or not. But, you know, they do call themselves the people of the book. So you have that kind of thrown around in historical texts with Hindu, the Srimad Bhagavatam. You have that through, especially the Vedas and those things. We have a lot of religions that are not old enough to really, you know, have a lot of, you know, like the Baha'is. I don't know that they have any ufology in their texts yet. But you know, it is definitely scrambled around. We also know that there are a lot of there's, you know, there's several pieces of, you know, Catholic art that included, you know, terrestrial,
Spaceships.
extraterrestrial craft,
Yeah.
you know, and other things that were very clearly done in the Middle Ages that were obviously intended in that manner, or at least appeared to be intended in that manner. And so, you know, these are things that, if you're really interested in that, there's a really good series of books by Yves Node. It's a 4-volume series on the history of ufology throughout these religions, and you can really get into all the individual experiences and the individual histories, and he really covers it in depth. um,
And you have several books that
yep.
particularly get into that.
Yes.
One is called Extraterrestrials,
Mm-hmm.
and what else? Let's see. I'm looking at your website here, trying to track them all down. You have 101 books, so I got to look through them and see. I studied. I mentioned last podcast that I studied at the International Academy of Consciousness, and some people are like, "Where do you start?" Because there's so much. And they said, I thought it was good advice, was just jump in and start anywhere. Start with something that fascinates you, that
Mm-hmm.
inspires you to dig deep into it, dive in. I see you
Yeah.
have a book on demonology,
Yes.
angelology,
Angelology. Yep.
and as I mentioned, the extraterrestrial one that I don't see right off the bat, but I'm sure I'll come
That's
across
in the
it.
Mystic Knowledge series. Yeah, which is actually the Mystic Knowledge series is a great place for people to look, because there's lots of individual subjects in there that people can, spiritual warfare, angels and demons, and ghosts and lost souls, things like that.
Yeah, we have,
Reincarnation, you know.
so we have, let's see. So one is out of body travel, ghosts and lost souls, spirit
Yep.
guides and guardian angels, reincarnation and karma, destiny and prophecy, extraterrestrials. Yeah, it was called extraterrestrials. Heaven and hell and purgatory, death, dying, and the afterlife, spiritual warfare, angels and demons, initiations into the mysteries, visions of Jesus and the saints, ascension, suffering and sickness. So those are all a part of the Mystic Knowledge series.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
great series.
Thank you. And one of the things you'll definitely find too is that, scattered throughout um, my books, in the Mysteries of the Redemption and all the books that follow, and the Mystical Captive series and the Solitary series, and I'm trying to remember myself, but
The
you're going to
redemption,
find, yeah,
the
you're going to
redemption
find that those
series.
extraterrestrial experiences are kind of thrown in there. I've been seeing a lot of the Arcturians lately, which is different for me because, from reading the Mysteries of the Redemption, you might recall, had a lot of experiences with the Pleiadians for
Yes.
years.
Mm-hmm.
And just in the last 6 months, started seeing the Arcturians, which I've never seen before. And so I'm still trying to uncover what the big mystery is there, but it seems to be something to do with acceleration of energy on the planet during this time. And it just started literally just like late December. And then, all this crazy stuff that's happening with the pandemic, I think it's related, but I think it has to do with the acceleration of energy, because they've been showing me these different things about acceleration of energy. And so I think it's related to, the unusual events that we're experiencing now, possibly.
So it'd be a
But
good time to meditate,
yes, definitely. It's
because
a
that's a
great time
very,
for that.
it's a receptive way to allow energy and information, knowledge, vibration to come into us.
Yes.
Just
And
quieten
it's a
us.
really good way to allow those energies to accelerate. And this is kind of, ironically with, a lot of people have been quarantined for a while, and it's starting to alter a little bit with what the recommendations are going to be for everybody, I guess. But the whole thing here has been an opportunity for receiving a little bit of acceleration, of that energy. And absolutely. And uh, the things that the Arcturians have shown me, because they don't speak to me, they just show me things, is just like everything that you do, putting this intention of acceleration onto it. And so whatever you're doing, if it's meditation, put that intention, that awareness, that consciousness of acceleration onto it, that it's kind of like,
Acceleration of our evolution, acceleration of our vibration.
well, it's acceleration of the vibration for
Okay.
sure, but it's also acceleration of whatever it is that, each individual might be being energized to do. So, you know, if, whatever you're doing to move forward, think of accelerate. Like if you're normally like, if you're normally like standing at a, like let's say you're at a beginning of a race, and you're gonna, let's say you're gonna run that race. But what you want to actually do then is actually imagine that acceleration where that's actually like spinning like like a wheel rather than running. One of the things they showed me was this way that they would pull their energy up and around them,
Mm.
so
It's like
that,
the microcosmic orbit, sort of.
well, it was like that, but it was also this extreme acceleration. So whatever you were doing, so, like if someone's involved in some type of work in science, accelerate it. If you're involved in spiritual work, accelerate. You know what I mean? If you're meditating, think acceleration, and part of this is just being open to receiving that, it's not going to be something that's like necessarily like just do this and this, it's going to be
Mhm.
being receptive to whatever you're doing being like accelerated by 100 times.
I've been doing that a lot when washing dishes. I'm the dishwasher of our house, so I'll do that, and for me, I have a mantra that I say, uh, whether it's God, 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 or something of that fashion. And
Hmm.
my intention is that. And so I used to always listen to stuff. I always had to be learning stuff. And what I find myself is when I'm driving, maybe I won't listen to something and I'll just connect in and be receptive to what is maybe I'm supposed to be bringing in or allowing to come in, and to not be like, okay, I gotta have my prefrontal lobe like active all the time, and instead just sit back and just be with my son, and just, okay, I'm driving you to the daycare, and cool, and just being in love and being in what's the potential for that moment, instead of me trying to create it of what I think with my left
Right.
brain, intellectual, I must learn about everything. Maybe all those lessons, just like when you're doing your out of body travel last night, and they gave you all these volumes of these energetic volumes of books for you to study and download and bring into who you are. I'm trying to bring that into my life
I
more.
think that's interesting. And, I used to always listen to certain types of different meditative music. And the last 6 months or so, I've really needed to just be listening to silence. And it's interesting that you say that about just being present with, I'm taking my son to take care. It's that's 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 really good, because you are becoming present, and that's accelerating what you're doing. You're not like absent from it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, this is part of the way that you can accelerate it as well. But definitely, the other thing I wanted to bring up when you said that too, the way that they give me the books, it's reminiscent, and I think this might help listeners to relate to it. Edgar Casey was known to be able to, they would put a book under his pillow at night, and he would have all the knowledge from that book in his head the next day. He didn't have to read it. And this is very similar in terms of what happens in the out-of-body travel state. We have a perception of activity, meaning we're doing something of value in our culture, when in reality, exactly what you said, can be the reality, where sometimes when we lay our head down to sleep and we just allow um, God or the universe or to actually act upon us, that may be much more fruitful than anything we think up at times. That doesn't mean don't listen to what you want to listen to or do your thing, but there is a place for silence and allowing God and realizing that acceleration sometimes is turning everything off and letting God do it and not thinking that we're in charge. And because that's what we kind of do. We put so much input that we almost block this phantasmically greater input, that we really need, that could alter things in a much more distinctive and much more meaningful way, because we feel it's doing nothing. And we've lost the understanding that it's actually sometimes the only way we can do something of deep significance and value, by allowing it to come into us rather than picking. It goes back to what I've always said in many of my interviews and in my books, which is when you're experiencing out-of-body travel, don't make the mistake of thinking that you want to set an intention of, I'm going to go here or I'm going to go there, because God knows much better where you need to go and what you need to see than you could know. And there are so many things that we don't know even exist. We wouldn't even think up. It's kind of along the same lines, where we limit ourselves, not realizing that that's what we're doing by not allowing God to do the forming. And so there's a place for all those things, but there's also a very important place for the silence and that acceleration that comes from God alone.
For me, I did a meditation, Tibetan Buddhism meditation, for a long time. And what was told to us by the teacher was we have to have something to meditate on as well. Like when we're learning, like for instance, you have a series on how to have out-of-body experience series. Come to Wisdom's Door, out-of-body experiences. Another book is Out-of-Body Travel and Mysticism, The Hammer of Mysticism, The Fragrance of the Mystical Rose, The Shining Ocean, The Primordial Seed, which is also Audible book. I devour your Audible books. Dos Dominos Omnibus.
Yes,
That right?
Deus Dominus, Deus Omnibus.
You say it way nicer than I do. And Fragrance, Mysticism. So as for me, what I do is I spend about maybe 10% of my time being receptive and 90% with input. And I'm quite cautious about what I have input coming into my human computer. But these, for me, guide me and take me to a different place. And as you said, the Mysteries of the Redemption is energetically coded. That was my experience. And I've listened to each of the 5 books of the Mysteries Redemption consciously, with intent, at least 6-7 times each, when I was writing the series for our television series that hopefully will happen sooner than later. So to me, I think it's very valuable to have people who've already gone to these spaces, who've been able to gone on these paths, to bring back this information, to show us a roadmap, show us what they've seen. It allows us to know things that we could not know ourselves. So it's kind of pushing us in a direction that I also feel allows us to have more OBEs, to have more
Yes.
experiences where we get to go to the places. Come to Wisdom's Door, for an example, is really about just like ascent of Mount Carmel, where it allows us to assist ourselves energetically to shed things that don't serve us anymore, so that we can lighten the load and have more experiences.
Right. Right.
And that's what I got from the Mysteries of the Redemption series too. It never really stops. But I'm going into Galactica. I just listened to that all night last night while I was sleeping. The Palace of
Fun.
the
That
Palace.
was a fun, very fun book to write. That
Yeah,
Galactica. I loved that round.
I like Galactica too. It comes right after the Mysteries of the Redemption, so it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the next volume.
Yep.
So I had to use part of Galactica to finish up our series to make
Oh,
it
cool.
really nice at the end. But also the Palace of Ancient Knowledge. I just listened to that one.
Oh, good. Okay.
Treatise on Ancient Mysteries.
Yep.
Touched by the Nails is another one that's on Audible.
Yep.
I've listened to a bunch of times. Books of Terror and Principles of the World Beyond Death. I've listened to in the last week. So those are some of my favorites. So I really wanted to set kind of a context and a chronology and a purpose for why you've written the books in the order you have, and get deeper into, because right now we're touching upon these books. Every
Yeah.
single book is a whole podcast, but I wanted to set it out there for people to listen to this podcast and be able to say, okay, so there's this and this. When you go to Audible and check out Marilynn Hughes, and in particular, if you go to the website where all the books are, you can type in those titles and they come up, and it's really easy to listen to Audible books. You can do it anywhere,
Yeah,
anytime.
and all of them are in Audible, you know.
Every
So,
single one?
uh-huh. Yeah.
Yay.
Every single one.
I get
Even
something out of every single one every time I jump into it. Every time.
good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. Yeah, and you know the Dialogues with the Mystic is being produced now, so it'll
Oh,
be in Audible soon too. So
yay.
so trying to keep up there.
That's great. And then you're working on a couple more right now as we speak too.
Yep, we're going to work on hopefully 2 and 3 of Dialogues with the Mystic, and I'm working on The Lord of the Redemption, which is the third in the Redemption series, which is the Limb of the Redemption, the Christ of the Redemption, and what will be the Lord of the Redemption. So
I'm
I
looking
am,
at that right now. The Mystical Captive series, which is the Mystical Captive, the Mystical Freeborn, and the Royal Question. So
yes,
when
and
did you
you know
write
that
these?
series and the Solitary series are among my favorites as well.
Tell me why. And why did you
Um,
write them? In what part of the chronology did they come up, and what do you think their purpose
Those
is?
ones came up right after, the Mysteries of the Redemption books, which would, I think, ended with, was it Principles of the World Beyond Death? Is that the last one there? Or,
The Mystical Jesus would be the. You mean the what did you just ask me? Say it again. I was trying to.
yeah, because there's the Mysteries of the Redemption, and then you have the other books that follow, which would be Galactica, The Palace of
Galactica
Ancient Knowledge,
and
Touched
Touched
by the
by the
Nails,
Nails.
Principles of the World Beyond Death, and then Books of Terror. And then, then you have the Redemption series, which I'm still working on the third there. But the Mystical Captive series and the Solitary series followed that directly. So that's the order. Ironically, most of the books follow there in the order that they occurred, but you know, now I'm seeing, yeah, so that's pretty much how they came. And the reason they are one of my favorites is because they were given to me in a slightly different way. There's a real poetic style that goes in. I was given these, uh, it's like poetic verse in a lot of the beginnings of the chapters and throughout the chapters. And I really liked that. It was, for me, it was my Rumi-esque moment, and I love Rumi. Um, and I really enjoyed this different style of writing, and ironically, even in what I'm doing with the Redemption series, it's a little bit different too than, the way the other styles. So, it's different as well, but I think the reason those two series are among my favorites is because of the poetic it was really like given to me to write it in a mystical, poetical type language. Um, and it's also just the experiences that I had for those books. I could still just close my eyes and remember some of the amazing things that I was allowed to see. You know, I still go back to I believe this one is in the Potentate, which is the third in the Solitary series, which is where I'm in this flowing gown at the top of this, this cavernous thing, and this, um, and I'm being given to fly and flow through this cavern, through these souls, and like singing and speaking, and the words that are being flown, that are flowing through me, um, are altering and assisting these souls, because these souls are um, struggling with something. And it was just such a beautiful place, and it's like, I can just, oh. Oh, it was just such a beautiful thing. Um, but the message in those books about, interestingly, in the Mystical Captive series, it really goes into um, going back to the beginning, the Garden of Eden, and what did it mean, that the fall of man, and how is it that we actually go back and recoup what we lost in the fall of man. And it's this beautiful journey. It was such a beautiful journey. And in the Solitary, it's taking it from there, which is the next step, which is how do we then become capable of recouping it for others, of taking that energy and then recouping it for others. And that's a simple way of putting it, but it's just some of the things that I was given to see, and um, the process of um, the bridal mysticism, the bridal chamber with Christ, the uniting with the Lord. And I still remember, I think this one was in the Mystical Captive, and I think of it all the time because it was such a powerful moment, where I was taken through, and I was walking through this cloudy space, and I came up behind this golden throne, and he was seated there, and he had this golden crown on his head, and he just literally just gently turned and looked at me. And it was like the moment that his eyes met mine, it was so astonishingly powerful. It was such a calm, peaceful, but it was in reaching out for my hand, and then I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. It was very simple, very short, very but it was something that will be etched on my memory forever.
You were told that your soul was also on several purgatorial spaces at once, right?
Let me.
Purgatorial, Earth-like third, fourth dimensional spaces.
Yes, like you mean the parallel
Yes.
existences? Yeah, yeah.
I had a question about that. We have our hell realms here and our heaven realms and our purgatorial realms. So we talked about terrestrials and the different terrestrial planets throughout this galaxy and all the galaxies. Does each, just like Earth, has their hell realms? Do all of those places have their different hells and such, or does it all intermingle?
Well, that's a good question, because I can answer that when you go to heaven, you're going to see extraterrestrials there. So we know that in the heavenly realms, there's a merging. But I can say that, I haven't seen that in like the purgatories or the hell realms. So I'm not sure about that, you know.
So maybe that's kind of cordoned off for this
I don't
Earth
know.
school,
It's
perhaps.
possible. I just don't know that for sure. It's a good question. Yeah, because that's an interesting question, thought, whether or not that's the case. But I do know that in the heavenly realms, I've seen it where, you know, they're there. But what's interesting is when you're there, you don't notice it. You only notice it when you come back, and then you're like, wait a minute, and you're like, wait a minute, there are extraterrestrials in heaven. Wait a minute, and then you have your surprise. But when you're there, it's so natural that they're there. You're like, hey,
Hey,
oh yeah, okay, hey, it
bath
doesn't.
the salt.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, catch you over there in a little bit. Okay. So it's so normal that it doesn't even occur to you to notice. And then you think about it later and you notice, and it's so we know that there's an overlap there. I haven't seen that overlap in the experiences that I've had, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means that I haven't seen that. And so
You
I
spoke
don't
of
know.
the Arcturians in the last 6 months or so. Do they look like us for the most part?
The ones that I've seen are blue,
Blue.
and their heads are more elongated in the back.
Okay. Do you think that in these apocalyptic times that we're going through, that perhaps extraterrestrials, as we call them, I hate even saying that, but because I just don't think it's one of those words where there's a knee jerk talismanic kind of a feel to it, like conspiracy theory, and like, what? Throw that in the garbage right away. You don't want to be affiliated with that. But do you think that there's maybe other beings that maybe are going to assist us at this time, or maybe some out there that are trying to not help and get over there?
Well, I've definitely seen, like with the Pleiadians that I saw for a long time, I know that they already have been trying to assist, and they've been doing so from the spiritual realm. Um, Whether or not they're doing so in any physical capacity, I don't know. Um, I do think that there are races that, you know, will probably eventually we'll probably get, come to meet them physically. But, the ones that are really trying to help us are mostly either interdimensional or higher dimensional. And so they don't necessarily exist in our sphere. So they're not third dimensional beings.
But we have
The
some in the
ones,
solar system, like on Venus.
well, there are some on Venus, but again, they're not third dimensional beings.
No.
So we can't necessarily see them through our physical eyes, but there are also other uh, other beings that don't have good intentions, and there are also beings that are a lot like us, where they're mortal beings, and they might think they're doing the right thing, but they're mortal, so they have both good and evil within them, and they might do things thinking it's the right thing, but it might not be. So you have a little bit of all of that. And I have been shown the possibility that there will be some type of intervention in these coming times. Whether that intervention will be physical or just in these interdimensional realms, I'm not sure. But definitely, I had visions starting in the early 90s. Talked about those before, but I had quite a few about um, the spaceships that were coming, and they were actually taking people off the planet, and people had to have certain criteria that they met. They had to it's kind of hard to understand exactly what it meant. But in one of them in particular, there was a coin, and it was a St. Joseph coin. And so it was some type of spiritual requirement that people had to have
Mm.
to be taken off the planet. And if they had that, then they were being boarded on the planet, off the planet into these craft, and they were circular craft, and there were like 4 or 5 in the sky at a time, and people were lined up, and it did appear that there was something going on that required that, on Earth. Um, uh, as to what that means, only time will tell. And it's a hard thing to know exactly what that kind of stuff means when you're before it happens, or was it something that was going on in the spiritual realms, because in the sense too that people can be taken up spiritually, and this is part of also ironically, I'll just throw this out there, not intended to offend, but even like people who have like the rapture theologies, being taken up, you know what I mean? This is kind of what was happening, and sometimes um, that can be associated with these kinds of possible beliefs as well. I don't know. um, I think it'll be interesting to see it unfold, because the things that I had were very powerful when I would have them, and they were so powerful that you would come back from them and be really surprised that it hadn't occurred. It was so conscious and so intense. And so I do think it'll be interesting to see if these things, um, with the extraterrestrials, terrestrials, whatever you want to call them, occur in these coming times. And we also don't want to forget, going back to the fact that all of the Marian apparitions have told us, we can alter events through prayer, you know and so all of the Marian apparitions over the past 200 years have said these things. And so we don't want to forget that. We don't want to energize apocalyptic events. We want to, if at all possible, put out the prayer in case it can still be averted. And then hopefully none of this stuff has to happen. And perhaps the earth actually moves into a higher sphere of existence where there can be some type of a spiritual regeneration, and it can be something better than that. But if not,
Mm.
you know, it's that's one of the things about even any type of it's any type of prophetic information you receive. You have to remember it's always something that can change, and so you have to always keep that in mind. And you also don't want to, like for instance, I'll just give you an example here, and this is part of the reason I really hesitate to put too much emphasis on it. Like for instance, with the ISIS terrorists that were running amok for quite some time recently, they had an ideology of their own perception of an apocalypse, and they were actually running around trying to create it, which is not recommended. It's not a good idea, and it's very evil and very dark, and it is so we have to not be energizing something of that nature. We have to, if we are aware of the possibility of these kinds of events, then we want to be part of the potential solution. So you got to be very careful about encouraging people to bring about those things. You know
Mm.
what I'm saying? Or in the case of ISIS, it was very very vigorously trying to bring about those things. But then we also have people who might do it just with their own thoughts, where they think this must happen in this way, and maybe it doesn't. Our Blessed Mother has appeared in all these places, Fatima, Garabandal, Medjugorje, and she has made it clear that these punishments can be averted if people pray. So we don't want to forget that we've been told it can be averted. Do you see what I'm saying? And so we want to make sure that if there is any way to alter the outcome of any kind of uh, less than desirable events that we may have entered into, that we actually do the prayers. She's told us to pray the rosary, to pray for the conversion of Russia, to pray for the conversion of Russia and the communist countries, and the conversion of the error of communism being spread around the world. People can look into the Marian apparitions. There's actually something on YouTube that I believe it's still on YouTube, Marian apparitions in the 20th century, that covers a great deal of the apparitions that occurred just in the 20th century of Mary, the Blessed Mother Mary, and the specific messages that she gave in those places. And that's a really good, overview, about 2 hours of letting people see exactly what the messages were. But for those of us who are aware of it, we want to remember that things can be averted if there's enough people who will pray and who will be willing to work towards altering that sort of thing. If it doesn't get altered, then we all want to be prepared to stand and do whatever it is that we were all called to do during these times. You know what I mean? But we don't want to energize the idea that it's the only way, it's the only way. And that, because what we want to be doing is praying. So, if there's anybody who's listening who's like, well, geez, what do we do? Well, just start praying. Start praying. Listen to that video, Marian Apparitions of the 20th Century. It'll give you a good overview. And then you can do more research if you're interested in it, about what the Blessed Mother has been asking of us.
That's great. I wanted to ask you, in regards to the history of the earth, Atlantis, Lemuria, how far back does it go from your experiences, from what you've seen?
Well, I know that I've gone back in time to a lifetime on Lemuria, and I did go back to a very short experience during a lifetime on Atlantis. And I'm not, forgive me for not having my I think this is before that, so I'm going to guess here, but I might have my history of the earth messed up. But I had a very powerful experience where I went back to some type of caveman existence, and I was facing off with some type of dinosaur type creature.
It was a woolly mammoth.
Was that a thank you? Yes. And I believe in that particular lifetime I had like a father. Is that what it
Yeah, he was
was?
egging you on, and
Yeah,
then
trying to get me to learn
you're
how
eyeballing the
to.
woolly mammoth, and then charged you, and you're like, oh, so you had to hit it in the heart. And if you didn't, you were dead, and you got him.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the earliest I've gone. That one would probably be the earliest I've
What was
gone.
Lemuria like?
Well, the lifetime that I had there.
And how far back is that?
That's a good question. I'm not sure, because I had just experienced it, and I was experiencing it as people were boating off, you know. And what I experienced was there was like uh, there was a kind of like a caste-like culture but it was like natives and what would have been some kind of dominant race. I don't know if they were white but they were more the dominant. And then, and so the natives were treated with less regard, and there was definitely some issue with the higher castes being evacuated first, and then I know, like in Atlantis, I was taken back, and I was experiencing some type of religious ceremony. It was an open-aired type building. And, this was a long time ago, so I'll try to remember. But I think it had something to do with like a bull or a buffalo. It was probably a bull, but it had to do with some type of animal like that. And there was something with the stars, and I was with somebody. I think it was a male, and I was just kind of witnessing this religious ceremony. Remember looking up at the stars, and I don't remember the details, but I know it's in the Mysteries of the Redemption, as is Lemuria. I think you can, I'm not sure if the PDF function has changed, but I think you can search those kinds of terms. But
Okay.
it's possible Atlantis was in Galactica, but you just read that, so probably not.
Well,
Probably.
no, I listened to it last night while I was sleeping. So I do
Oops,
not
sorry.
remember. But yeah, most of your books I've not read, I've listened to. Because I
Okay.
used to read like crazy, but I don't know what happened. All of a sudden I just started listening to. And I felt like I could just devour a lot more. I kind of had a job too where it was perfect for listening to stuff. So I could
Yep.
just do it all day long. So it was fantastic. And then I just got used to doing that.
A lot of people seem to like the Audible, and it's actually not a bad way to do things too, because you can utilize it to even go off in meditation. So just as you're talking about using it, that's a good approach. So
I had it in my head that somehow I was going to do a chronology of your work and put everything into context and what your purpose was. And I'm looking at the overview series, the oral transmissions of the 52 Soto Zen Buddhist ancestors, the doctors of the Catholic Church, the general councils of the Catholic Church, the Marian apparitions in the Catholic Church, the heresies in the Catholic Church, miraculous phenomena in the Catholic Church, on and on, writers of the Philokalia. It goes on and on. But every one of these, and I have about 30 or so of your Audible books, but every one of them is something we could spend an entire podcast
yep,
on easily
yep,
just to
yeah,
get
we
into it.
could.
And when I noticed that I listened to something over and over, because I remember I think it was the Christ of the Redemption I listened to. It's a long one. It's like 36 hours. And I
Is
listened to
it?
it, something like that. And then I called you and I was like, yeah, I just listened to that. And you're like, oh, really? Well, what do you think about the blah, blah, blah? And I was like, I don't know. I have no idea what you're talking about. And you're like, well, maybe you need to go back. And so what I notice is when I go over it a couple of times, 3 times, that every time I go over it, there's something else. Maybe I wasn't ready for it at that time. I needed other stuff first to preclude that.
Yeah.
So just more I get into it at the feet of the masters, Posadas you just mentioned. Um, it just goes on and on and on. Oh, you have
Well,
children.
there's a series that's World Religions, Out of Body Travel in World Religions, and then you mentioned the overview series, and so those are. I really liked doing the world religion books because each one of those covers 6 or 7 of the major world religions, just depending on which ones had ancient texts available on the subject matter, and so that allows you to like explore subjects and actually really understand it from the view of different world religions. But there's a few of my favorite books under there, like Forgotten Mystics, you
Yeah,
know.
that was good.
Yeah, I love that. That was one of my favorite books to write, just because it's all these, forgotten mystics. Oh my gosh,
In world religions.
yes. And then,
Selfishness and self-will. Everyone should write that because, I mean, read that. Everyone should write it too.
yeah.
Write it out,
Well,
long
it's
form.
interesting. I wrote that one in response, ironically, when I was on Coast to Coast AM in 2009. I talked a great deal about my near-death experience in 2003, and how the big thing was Jesus was telling me that the purpose in human life was to go from selfishness to selflessness. And I literally got like 7,000 emails on people saying, I want to hear about that. And I was like,
Well,
and
let's
so
let's
that
do a
was a
podcast.
response to everyone being excited about that and wanting to know more. And so that's, selfishness and self-will, and the path to selflessness. I can't even say my own titles, in world religions. So I go through the ancient sacred texts and cull from those the best writings on how to achieve that goal. And a lot of those texts are done that way. And then in the overview series, those books are intended to give people a nice overview on what normally are really big religious topics. And so, like the Marian apparitions, I have like 32 of them in there. So that's actually a good one for people to download if they want to know more, not just about the 20th century ones, but the ones in the 19th century as well. Because, the last 200 years, we've had a whole load of them, but also just the history of Marian apparitions to the beginning, which goes back to the Apostle Thomas, when he saw the Blessed Mother, the Black Madonna. So that's the first one, And so, but all of those books, the overview series, like you mentioned, the Soto Zen ancestors, one of my faves. And the reason why is because this is literally the transmission stories of enlightenment from Shakyamuni Buddha through 52 of the Soto Zen ancestors. This is literally the lineage of the moments of enlightenment. It's really one of my favorites, taken from the Denkaraku, which was, a medieval Zen text, which was only, translated into English, I think, in the 20th century, but only became available to lay people in the 20th century too, because they'd kept that from regular readers. It was just for the monasteries. And so this is like a fascinating text to have access to, because it literally gives the individual moment of enlightenment for each of those ancestors. It's the transmission points. It's really amazing. Talk about great things to meditate on. That one has really good stuff. And of course, Riders of the Philokalia. Oh my gosh, I love the Philokalia. So, the Riders of the Philokalia are the writings of the early desert fathers. That's the Orthodox tradition. These are the followers of Saint Anthony, and the early desert fathers who all went into the caves in Egypt and came up, literally became desert mystics and monks and wrote some of the most profound writings in Christian history. So I love the Philokalia, and that was, so there's a lot of them in there. And there's, the history of heresy in the Catholic Church, the councils of the Catholic Church, which is helpful because there's like 22 of them. And so it's helpful to get an overview of it. Also the things, doctors of the Catholic Church, but there's, that's what they are, trying to take those big subjects. The one that we crack jokes about is Protestant reforms, which is because it is in the overview series, but I got a little bit detailed on that one. So it's a little bit more than an overview.
We have comparative religious mystical theology, forgotten mystics in the world, religions, a life of cultivation, stories of the prophets and world religions, stories of the sages from ancient sacred texts,
Yep.
miraculous images. Wow, man, that's a lot of stuff. Come on now, miraculous phenomena. All right, so I love that we have this opportunity to dive into these amazing subjects, and I love to learn about them too. And then I get to talk with you about it, and you get to assist us on our journey, which is really when it comes down to what is your purpose? Like, why do you write all these books and put them out, and why do you do these talks? What are you all about, Marilynn?
Well, it's reducing spiritual hunger worldwide. But what does that mean? I mean, it's trying to bring to people what they're missing in terms of the purpose of their existence. You know, there's a lot of people running around who feel like, well, I'm kind of lost. I don't feel like there's a purpose in my life. And there is a purpose to our lives, but we've lost it in great part. There is a reason why we incarnate here, and it is this purification journey that we take. And I do this because I was literally, instructed to do so in every step of the way, literally every single detail, but also because the purpose of it being that we're trying to provide a window for people to realize that there is a purpose, and it can be easily achieved. It's not like some really hard to find, it does require effort and discipline. I talked earlier about how some people don't want to do the work, but it does require effort and stuff. But this is the thing that so many of us are missing, and we're finding that we don't feel like we have meaning in our lives. The reason we don't have meaning is because we're missing the point of why we're here. So if we understand why we're here, and we understand what we need to be doing, then that can shift really fast. And so a little bit of direction in one way or the other, and then we let God take a hold of your hand, and we're going to start seeing people really soar. And that's why we do it. We want to try to see if we can lift up a bunch of souls to accelerate. Accelerate.
And you are helping us in a big way. I love your books, and I know a lot of people do. And I want to thank you for all of the work that you've done,
Oh, thanks,
and
Brian.
and for your heart to share it with people in the most altruistic way. And so, thank you, and namaste to you.
Namaste.
Let's do it again. We're gonna have some vignettes coming out from this one,
Awesome.
and we'll get deeper into. We'll see what we want to talk about for next time. Maybe we'll just dive into one of these subjects and do a deep dive. I wanted to do, like I said, an overview, so to speak, and just kind of skate over a bunch of titles, give some people some ideas. I would really recommend Audible. I love Audible. I have a hard time with electronic media sometimes, just like
Yeah.
reading. Like my mom is into the Kindle books and stuff. I need a book in my hands. So I've ordered some of your books so I can circle, square, underline, make a notation in the side, because I have to have them in my hand. But for people that's not a problem with, they're all available on Out of Body Foundation,
Outofbodytravel.org,
outofbodytravel.org.
which is the Out of Body Travel Foundation. Yep.
Yes, yes.
And yeah, you can download them for free there. And then they are available in paperback, and in all the electronic formats, and in Audible. Absolutely.
That's
Yep.
fantastic. Just dive in. Start wherever, whatever feeds your soul. Jump
Yep.
in and rock. And so, as far as prayer, if we were to do a prayer right now for these times, what would it be like? Maybe you and I can pray together, and maybe people who listen to this, when they hear it, they could do the prayer, and that would just spread out across the earth. How's that sound?
Well, that sounds good. And I think what I would do is take a little bit from the Chaplet of the Divine Mercy, because it's such a powerful prayer. And I would also direct people, go to the website at outofbodytravel.org, and we have the course of study there. And under the course of study link is a page called Today's Liturgy and Prayer. And you can learn this and many other prayers on that page as well. And so I definitely encourage that. And if you take the course of study, you're going to learn a lot of prayer. So you'll learn a lot of cool things on the course of study, along with a lot of other cool things. So,
Can you show us a prayer right now that people can take and use?
Yep. And this is from the Chaplet of the Divine Mercy. It's, Eternal Father, I offer you the body and blood, soul and divinity of your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, in atonement for our sins and for the sins of the whole world. Amen. For the
Amen.
sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world.
Amen. Okay, until next time, Marilynn.
Sounds good, Brian.